snakebite particularly, that's the branch of toxinology I've been most engaged with, how neglected it's been. For example, my earliest experience of snakebite was purely by chance when I started work in northern Nigeria in the 1970s, and I happened to admit into the university hospital where I was working in Zaria a number of patients with very severe snakebite envenoming, with very bad results, death and loss of limbs and so on. And what surprised me there was that the local doctors working in the hospital, they were both Nigerians and expatriates. They didn't seem to have much knowledge or experience of snakebite, even though my stay there for the subsequent 7 years, I found it to be a common problem in that part of Nigeria. So very surprising that there was so little interest. And when I looked at literature, normally you turn to the textbooks or to the medical literature, there was really very little that was relevant. And but most surprising, when I asked experienced doctors who lived and worked in Nigeria, well, all their lives in some cases, they didn't seem to know much about it. So it's that baseline, that background of ignorance, and perhaps lack of interest too. Not that they didn't have compassion for the patients, they certainly had that, but they hadn't been driven to seek answers or to find evidence for what treatments were available. Many other countries where I worked, after Ethiopia and Nigeria and Africa, I moved to Southeast Asia, based in Thailand, but working in nearby Myanmar, Burma, and in Sri Lanka, and then Papua New Guinea, and later in Latin America. There was always this surprise that a problem that, at least in my personal experience, turned out to be quite a common one, quite an important one, wasn't that a rare disease that you could excuse doctors for not knowing about, what seemed to be so neglected. And it's this neglect of snakebite as a public health issue, which has finally, only in the last 2 or 3 years, has suddenly surfaced with the recognition by World Health Organization and now by the sponsorship of important international funding agencies like the Wellcome Trust and like the Department for International Development in the United Kingdom, and in Germany and other European countries as well. Well, yes, I have been privileged to work on the development of antivenoms, and in fact on the development of knowledge about snakebite in all 4 tropical continents, including Papua New Guinea in Oceania. And all these countries had different, interesting and different challenges. But I think you've asked me to identify one, and this was a program of work that started from my initial experience of snakebite in Nigeria, and it really involved trying to provide an antivenom in a country that for which there was no appropriate antivenom. And this was made possible through an initiative coming from the Federal Ministry of Health in Nigeria. So there was a very enlightened Minister of Health called Professor Olikoye Ransom-Kuti. He was actually a retired professor of pediatrics, and he approached us in the United Kingdom, approached me and a colleague at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. By the way, I'm based at the University of Oxford, and asked for our help to develop this program. And so with some very good local collaborators in Nigeria, doctors and Ministry of Health officials, we developed this program of, first of all, confirming how important the problem was in Nigeria, and then going on to develop 2 candidate antivenoms, one specifically for the most important, medically important snake in the region, which is the carpet viper or saw-scale viper, Equus oscillatus it was called in those days, and also a trivalent antivenom covering the 3 medically most important snakes, which is the carpet viper, together with spitting cobra and the puff adder. And these candidates, produced by two different companies, a company based in Wales in the United Kingdom, and another company in Costa Rica, who were willing to develop these antivenoms. It was a very altruistic project because they certainly weren't expecting, nor did they get much commercial benefit. So they were doing it for the good of the people. And both these candidate antivenoms performed very well in the preclinical laboratory tests. And then we were able to, this whole program culminated in about the early 2000s with a very large clinical trial carried out in the north of Nigeria, in the same hospital where I'd worked in the 1970s, a small district hospital in Kaltungo, in northeastern Nigeria. So it was the largest ever clinical trial attempted for antivenom, which isn't saying very much because there's been practically no proper formal clinical testing of antivenoms. But it was a large trial, a well-designed one, and it involved more than 400 patients, all bitten by this same species of carpet viper. And the results were spectacularly good. Patients who arrived in hospital with blood that wouldn't clot because of the effects of the venom on the blood clotting factors, but also on blood platelets and damaging the vascular endothelium, which that combination could lead to a fatal hemorrhage, for a bleed into the brain, for example. So in these patients with incoagulable blood, within 6 hours of the first dose of either of these candidate antivenoms, most of the patients had restored blood coagulability. So in a way, they're out of danger of having a sudden, massive and potentially fatal hemorrhage. So that was a very rewarding project.